तो ये तो आपका वो होगा ना फिर
ईमेल।
हाँ ठीक है, मैं आज ही आपको एक वो मेल भेजूंगा।
हाँ ये लेकिन हम नहीं, हमें SPSTI का आता है मेल। हाँ
आता है, ये भी आता है।
आता है, वहीं से तो देखा है
ज्वाइन
मैंने,
करो
तो ईमेल से हमने
अच्छा
पिकअप किया था ना ये।
ओके 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 फाइन, थैंक यू।
नहीं, मुझे बहुत खुशी है आप
Ma'am, we have started live
शर्मा जी
telecast on Facebook.
Started.
So, over to Professor Kia, ma'am.
आपको मेरा मेल मिल गया।
Over to Professor Kia, ma'am.
Thank you. Shall we start?
Yes, please.
Yes, ma'am. Please start now.
Okay. Let me wait for half a minute more because we were expecting many more people, especially students from colleges. And okay, people are joining. So let us begin today's session. A very good afternoon to all assembled here today. Today is a good day because we are having this lecture by two very eminent people, but it is also a very good day to have this because it is the 360th anniversary of formation of the Royal Society. On November 28, 1660, exactly 360 years ago, the Royal Society was formed in London after a lecture by Christopher Wren, professor of astronomy at Gresham College.
Great coincidence.
So, welcome everybody, particularly Professor Jassal, Professor Bagla, and now over to Professor Grover, who will give a few remarks before we start the lecture. Professor Grover.
So good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
So on behalf of the Chandigarh chapter of National Academy of Sciences of India and the Society for Promotion of Science and Technology of India, it is indeed my pleasure to welcome all of you once again, but today on the fifth lecture of the Nobel Prize series 2020, Nobel Prizes 2020. And today's lecture on Nobel Prize in Physics actually comprises a pair of presentations being given by two professors of Indian Institute of Science Education and Research. And as Kia just announced, our two speakers today are Professor Harvinder Kaur Jassal and Professor Jasjeet Singh Bakla. And both of them actually are the co-hosts of this series. When we planned this series by first talking to Jasjeet at IISER Mohali. So he has come in at the fifth spot, but the series commenced by first talking to him that should we have this series? So we are very happy. We are more than halfway down. And thereafter, as far as the Nobel Prizes are concerned, in our series, 2 more lectures would be left. Okay, of course, one on chemistry and one on peace. So, but this series would get continued in the sense that we would also include a lecture on Abel Prize in Mathematics and the Turing Award in Computer Sciences. And I'm very happy to share with you that for the Abel Prize, Professor S.G. Dani, formerly the Dean of School of Mathematics at TIFR, now at CBS Mumbai, he has agreed to deliver the lecture on Abel Prize 2020 in January of 21. Abel Prizes are announced typically in the month of March. So the Abel Prize 2020 was announced in March 2020. And similarly, the Turing Award is also announced in March. So that had been announced in March of 2020 as well. And the lecture on the Turing Awards, in general, what Turing Awards are, what did Professor Raj Reddy do to get that get a Turing Award. And we just had a lecture by Professor Raj Reddy on the platform of Punjab Engineering College as a part of the commemoration of their centenary just 15 days ago. So Professor Dheeraj Sanghi will tell us what the history of Turing Awards have been, what work merited an award to Professor Raj Reddy, and what work merited the Turing Award winner 2020. So from next year, we will have Turing Award and Abel Prize lectures before the commencement of the lectures on the Nobel Prizes. So, and we will make it a complete package from the subsequent years. So with little bit of these information, I conclude my address for today, and may I now invite the first speaker to give a presentation. But before that, one of us from the SPSTI will formally introduce Professor Harvinder Kaur Jassal. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Grover, for the information. I now request Professor Suman Beri of Punjab University to introduce the speakers. I believe she will introduce both the speakers. Professor Beri.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. So it is my pleasure and privilege to introduce both the speakers. Both of them are very well known. I don't think they need introduction, but as a formality, let me introduce both the speakers of today's event. First speaker is Professor Harvinder Kaur Jassal. She graduated from SGTB Khalsa College, Delhi, and did her MSc Physics and PhD in General Relativity from University of Delhi. She did her postdoctorate from HRI Allahabad. It's an institute which is devoted to research in mathematics and theoretical physics. And then she also did from IUCAA, which is Inter-University Center of Astronomy and Astrophysics, Pune. She also worked as a women scientist in the DST scheme of women scientists as a fellow in HRI. At present, she is a faculty professor at IISER Mohali. Her research is on cosmology, theoretical and observational aspects of dark energy, which is a very hot topic of research at present. Dr. Harvinder takes keen interest in science outreach activities and also issues related to gender equality. She is a life member of Astronomical Society of India and the Indian Association of General Relativity and Gravity. I think I will not stand too much between speaker and the audience. So let me introduce the second speaker. So to maintain the continuity in the talks, so let me introduce the second speaker of today, that is Professor J.S. Bagla. As again, he is a very well-known personality in his field, and he also graduated from SGTB College, Khalsa College, Delhi. He did his MSc in physics from University of Delhi and did PhD from IUCAA, Pune, where he worked under the guidance of a very towering personality, Shri T. Padmanabhan, a very well-known personality in astrophysics and this. Then he moved to Cambridge as a postdoctoral fellow, and he did another postdoc in the Center of Astrophysics, Harvard University. He returned to India to join HRI Allahabad as a faculty member. He is currently professor at IISER Mohali. He is also Dean Academics at IISER Mohali. He takes keen interest in science outreach activities. I have seen him in so many talks, a very enthusiastic person and he's always ready to participate in Skywatch event. He has many times for SPSTI participated for Skywatch events. He is a member of International Astronomical Union. He is life member of Astronomical Society of India, as well as Indian Association of General Relativity and Gravity. Dr. Bagla has served in many committees of National Research Center in Astronomy and Astrophysics, and also in BRICS Association of gravitational astrophysics and cosmology. Both the speakers of today are honored and coveted members of SPSTI and very active members of SPSTI. We welcome you both, Professor Harvinder and Professor J.S. Bagla. So Professor Harvinder, please, I invite you for your talk today.
You remember me when I had come to Chandigarh to give a progress report on my VOSA fellowship. And also I see many mentors from all. Thanks a lot for joining, and thanks a lot for a very kind introduction. I'll just share my screen before I start speaking. Okay. Yes. So today we are celebrating Nobel Prize in Physics 2020. And okay. So a Nobel Prize in Physics 2020 is it's very important award for people who are working in general relativity, because it also it celebrates lifetime work of Professor Roger Penrose, who contributed a lot to our understanding of general relativity. And the other half of the prize goes to Reinhard Genzel and Andrea Ghez, who after very long and laborious and very meticulously planned observations, deduced that there is a very massive compact object at the center of our own galaxy, and which we now know as, which we now understand to be a supermassive black hole. I'll be talking about the one half of the award, that is the roughly what is our understanding and what is the contribution of Roger Penrose in that. And Roger Penrose, who was born in 1931 in Essex, is currently an emeritus Rose Ball Professor of Mathematics at University of Oxford. And his work is the work which is being celebrated the most for our understanding of general relativity is to understand the singularities that we have. Okay, so in this talk, I will talk about black holes and what are the singularities which are there. It's the speculation about something like called the dark stars dates back to 1763, which British, an English priest, John Michael, was also an astronomer. He basically calculated and said, okay, and you can see, I have managed to get the original text, and you can see that the old style S is there. Okay, so instead of reading it as, we tend to read it as F, okay, but it's S here. And you can see that it says that if the sphere of the same density with the sun were to exceed that, the sun in proportion of 500 to 1, a body falling from an infinite height towards it would have acquired at its surface a greater velocity than that of light. And this was remarkable because this calculation was based on Newtonian mechanics, and he could deduce that there can be something from which light would not escape. And this is the popular understanding of black holes also. We have all been fascinated by this, that, okay, something exists from which light can also not escape. And many of us took general relativity studies because of these fascinating objects called the black holes. Okay. And he named that these dark stars. And he also basically, it's again remarkable in the same article, John Michael also speculates how these objects will be discovered. For instance, writes here, we could have no information from sight, that we cannot see them. Yet, if any other luminous bodies should happen to revolve about them, we might still perhaps from the motions of these revolving bodies infer the existence of the central ones. And this is precisely what the Nobel Prize, the second half, which Jaspreet will be talking about, is about, to basically see how stars orbit around a certain massive object, the center of our galaxy. And in 3 years later, independently, Laplace published the expositions, the famous expositions. And this is in French, but I actually translated it. And here, what he says that, okay, if something, the same density, if you have a star of the same density as the Earth, it will weigh 200, the 250, the 250 times the radius. It will be what? The same dark stars that Michael had talked about. And in the end, he says that these will be the, in comparison to this other objects, these will be the principal objects of astronomy in the future. And this was quite prophetic, I would say. And I was quite interested when I looked up this, quite impressed by when I, in fact, quite overwhelmed when I looked at this text in French written so long ago, even before anything, even before general relativity came into being. So in 1950, the popular understanding of black holes, let's talk about a little bit about escape velocity. And I'm doing this precisely because some of the terms that we see over here will come back and basically we'll see them later. So for the students who are here, you can see that, okay, there you need an escape velocity. Where we need to run away from Earth with a velocity higher than 11 kilometers per second if we want to escape the Earth's gravitational force. So as you go further away from the surface of the Earth, the velocity is smaller. The escape velocity needed is smaller. And if you are smaller, if you start your journey less than the speed of this velocity, you will fall back down to the Earth. Okay. And this velocity is given by this formula to the universal gravitational times the universal gravitational constant, mass of the Earth, and the distance from the center. Okay. And this is important. We all know this in the Newtonian mechanics. And just replace this by, if you want the escape velocity to be the speed of light, replace this with c, okay? And you get mass and radius, let's say, of the object, 2gm by c square. Now, just 2gm by c square will hit us later when we actually go to, and all this calculation is Newtonian mechanics. And this will come back to us when we go to general relativity. So in 1915, Einstein basically changed the concept of how we understood gravity. Newtonian mechanics was gravity as a force. With this force depended on masses of the objects and inversely proportional to the square root of distance between them. And this force was, it's a force because it accelerates objects. Now what Einstein did was he said, okay, gravity is not a force. Gravity is part of space-time itself. Gravity, a massive body, curves a surface, curves space-time. First, the notion of space and time are not different entities, space-time. Massive object curves space-time, and you can understand it from this, let's say a bed sheet with grid on it, and you put a massive body over it. And I will show you a nice video on this, which is, this is the Einstein Thrust project by David Blair in Australia. And if students are there in the audience, I urge you to look at this. I will just show you one of these. Okay. So I will reduce a little bit of volume. Okay.
The video is not playing.
So you see, someone will put a ball on this. It's too loud.
No, it's fine.
Okay, yeah. So you put a massive body, and you imagine if the mass is larger, this tip will be larger and larger and larger, and you can visualize in 2 dimensions the black hole. That okay, nothing can be able to come out. And see the objects which are, and this is the person who coined the term black hole. Okay, just see a more massive body, it curves this space more, and these are objects which are orbiting around it till the time they fall into it. And you can see an Indian name over here. Okay, I'll come back to the presentation now. If you look at it carefully, you can see that, okay, the massive body is curving the space-time around it. So bodies, the idea of orbiting bodies is also a different notion now, because now light, let's say, is traveling, happily traveling in a straight line. Is the structure of space-time that is curved. Okay. So I will urge the students here to look at these videos again. They are quite remarkable videos. Okay. And within a few months, even before Einstein realized that an exact solution is possible, he had gotten perihelion shift of Mercury, but that was not an exact solution. That was a solution which is approximate. Schwarzschild, it is also remarkable. He was on a hospital bed after the war, and he wrote a paper, the gravitational field of a point mass in Einstein's theory. Sorry for the spelling mistake. And what he assumed was, okay, that we have spherical symmetry, and very far off, you have flat space-time. That is, the Newtonian laws will hold at very far off from the central point mass. And this was even, as I said, even Einstein did not have this first exact solution, and he came up with the distance square. This is how the distances, we look at distances in general relativity. You can forget about this angle part for the time being. And time and space combine, as you can see over here, and there is a relative minus sign in between. So without going into the detailed mathematics of it, this is the first exact solution of Einstein's relativity. This is the distance squared. And looking at it, you can see that if this r is same as this quantity, this term will become infinity, it will blow up. And if r is 0, this term will become infinity. And these are what are called these are roughly what, this is the singularity that we have in this. But this particular, so let me put this is spherical symmetry. So you can imagine there is a sphere. This is sphere in 3D. Okay, I'll come to this space and time thing later. So you have a spherical sphere, and at r equal to 0, which is the center, there is a singularity. Now this particular sphere is the radius, which is called the Schwarzschild radius, 2g m by c square. This is precisely the same thing which we had seen when I had shown the escape velocity, the same formula. Now, this is not a singularity, because you can anyway go to any other coordinates of your choice. You don't like Minkowski coordinates, you don't like straight line grids, you want spherically symmetric coordinates or different coordinates. You change a coordinate to something called the Eddington-Finkelstein coordinate system, and there is no singularity at this particular point. So we call it a coordinate singularity. It's not very serious for us. But the center, this r equal to 0 is a singularity, and you can't get rid of it by just transforming to a different coordinate system. But this does not remove its importance. This particular radius is the radius of event horizon, and this is the surface of no return. Once you enter this, you cannot come out. And that is what the concept of black hole for us is. But outside, far off, a black hole is just a massive body. It will behave exactly the same way as any other massive body of the same mass, okay? And you can orbit around it, just like Earth orbits around the sun. So for any ordinary particle like us, you can go close around 3 times the Schwarzschild radius. And if you are light, you are allowed more in way, and you can go up to 1.5 times the Schwarzschild radius. And these are called the innermost stable circular orbits. Okay. If you fall in below that, you will definitely fall into the black hole. Okay. So this is the singularity, and you'll fall into this singularity. Now, pioneering work has been done by Indian origin scientist Chandrasekhar, who was actually born in Lahore, if people are interested in knowing about his biography. So he pointed out that a white dwarf cannot have mass more than 1.4 times the solar mass. Now, the white dwarfs are basically, you cannot compress it because of the degeneracy pressure. And if they're undergraduates, they will know what is that. That okay, the simplest way to understand is that 2 electrons cannot have the same 2 electrons with the same quantum number cannot stay in the same place. So you cannot put 2 more than 2 electrons in a same state. Okay? So that's the exclusion principle for you. Okay. And if the mass exceeds by more than 1.4 times the solar mass, it is an unstable object. And because I won't go into the details of that, but a star which exceeds this mass is also destined to end its life in a very violent explosion, which is called a supernova. So if this limit exists, you cannot no longer resist the force of gravity and you have to collapse. Okay. And in 1939, Oppenheimer and Schneider found calculated analytical solutions, and they showed that if a pressureless dust ball collapses, spherically symmetric pressureless dust collapses, they calculated, found analytical solutions, and they showed that this forms an event horizon, and that forms a black hole, which we now call the black hole. Interestingly, the same calculation was done by Vishweshwar Dutt from Presidency College much earlier, who actually died in 1938 during a hernia surgery. The same calculation was independently obtained by him, and his paper was finally published in 1997 as a legacy publication. So acknowledgement for that. I couldn't find any picture of this. This is of him. This is Oppenheimer. And our current understanding is, pardon me for this, that if a star collapses and has mass less than 1.4 times the solar mass, it will end its life and remain as a white dwarf. If this is greater than 1.4 solar masses, you end up with a neutron star, and approximately 3 solar masses. If this star collapses or dies, you end up with a black hole. Okay. So now let's try to understand how Penrose, what was Penrose's contribution in it, and that we can do by way of what we call, the relativists call, the space-time diagram. So instead of XY plotting, I would just plot X and time over here, CT, because then it becomes the same as the dimensions of space dimensions, the length dimensions. Okay, and this line is the line on which light travels. This is the 45-degree lines. This is the path trajectory of a photon. Okay. You can see CT, X, and this is where light will travel. In the other, if the photon is traveling in the other direction, you will have this. Now, for an ordinary observer like us, our life is confined to either here, the past, or here, the future. And ordinary, this should have passed through it's my drawing issue, sorry for that, but this is our past. This is the past light cone, if you have more than, because we just don't live in X, we have X, Y, and Z directions also. So this is the past life cone. All our past is contained in this cone, and all our future, we cannot go beyond this point unless we travel by speed of light, which is greater than speed of light. So this is our future light cone, and this is our past light cone. Okay. And you can see that this is 45-degree lines over here and here. Okay. Now what happens? So this is the future light cone. So you just rotate, these are X, Y. This is a two-dimensional representation, or rather picture of it. So time is in this direction, X, Y. This is the cone that you have. And this is the present, t equal to 0 for you. Everything you have done is contained over here, and everything you will do will be here. Okay. So now what happens when this is the regular flat space-time you are used to thinking it. What happens if you are going towards a black hole? Very far away from the black hole, everything is flat, everything is hunky-dory. Light cones they're like ordinary light cones over here. You start approaching the black hole, they start to bend. You can see now the future is towards this direction. Okay. And at the event horizon, this is r equal to 2gm by c square. This is r equal to 0, and this is spherically symmetric. So in both directions, this is r equal to 2gm by c square, r equal to 2gm by c square. So at the event horizon, something interesting happens. These light cones flip their direction. So time becomes space, and space becomes time. And since now time is flowing in this direction, there is no option but to fall into the singularity. You cannot come out of it. And this is a pictorial way of understanding this event horizon. And this is the work published by Penrose. What he said was, okay, the collapsing matter makes a trapped surface. He called this event horizon the trapped surface. Okay, and this is the same picture which I had shown you earlier, but this is now matter collapsing to form a black hole. And you can see light cones are now the same behavior which I showed you earlier, falling into the singularity once they enter the event horizon. And this was Penrose's contribution in 1964. And in this context, Penrose's other contribution is basically saying that this singularity always has to be covered with the event horizon. There are no naked singularities. And this is called the cosmic censorship hypothesis. Okay. And although there are many other contributions, but I think for this particular Nobel Prize and in our understanding of black holes, these two are the most important contributions which Penrose has given. Okay. And all this work, basically, I should also mention here that Professor A.K. Roy Chaudhary, whose Roy Chaudhary equations Penrose used, and he was inspired at them and used topological constructs to show all the results which I have talked to you about earlier. So this, the Roy Chaudhary equations were an important component of that work. Another thing which is the undergraduates would like to see maybe later is, this is the Penrose diagram, which people who study general relativity, this is Penrose diagrams. We in general relativity are, I mean, everyone studies these. So this is the light, this is the infinite past, these are the light lines in 45 degrees. This is the line of event horizon, and this is the time is flowing in this direction, and this is singularity. So this is the surface of a star. This is a star collapsing into and basically going towards this. This is here, it's approaching the singularity. Okay. So these are a way to draw whatever we have just said. And trust me, a lot of mathematical details go into computing these. Apart from these, Penrose's other concepts have been this impossible triangle, okay, and Penrose tiles. This is the five-fold symmetry tiling. And I think this is my last slide. We know about black holes now, and I think we should look for one now, and that's where the next talk would be focusing on. Thank you. Should I unshare my screen? Yeah.
That's fine. Yeah. So thanks, Harvinder. So that takes care of the formation of black holes and the singularity theorem part, which was the key contribution of Roger Penrose. Now we move to observations of black hole in the galaxy. So the galaxy is used for our own galaxy. Reinhard Genzel, shown here on the right, and Andrea Ghez, shown on the left. These are the two awardees this time. So they received 1/4 of the Physics Nobel Prize each for this year. And their citation says that this is for the discovery of a supermassive compact object at the center of our galaxy. So evidence for black holes in galaxies has been gathering for quite some time. Indeed, in 1964, Martin Schmidt, a Dutch astronomer working in Caltech, he realized that one of the objects discovered in the Cambridge survey for radio sources was at an extraordinarily high redshift for that time, not right now. I mean, at present, we know things which are much, much further up. So he discovered that this source called 3C273 was at a redshift of 0.15 approximately. 3C refers to the third Cambridge catalog of radio sources, and 273 refers to the row number for this particular source. Martin Schmidt tried to localize this source using optical telescopes and discovered that all he could see over there was a star. Then he took a spectra If you talk about stars, it was much fainter than the stars which we see with our own eyes, but not a whole lot fainter, just about a factor of 300 or so fainter than the faintest stars which we can see on a clear night with our eyes. He took a spectrum and he couldn't make head and tail out of it for a long time. Eventually, he realized that he was having difficulty in interpreting the spectrum because the spectral lines were shifted by a large amount. And he found that the redshift was about 0.15. So delta lambda by lambda was about 0.15. All the wavelengths were shifted to longer wavelengths by about 15%. If we take that to be cosmological expansion, in that case, the effective distance for this source is enormously large. And the fact that it was only about a factor of 300 fainter than the faintest stars we could see meant that it must be extraordinarily bright. It must be emitting a lot of light. And the explanation for so much light being emitted by such a small source, such a distant source, the only explanation which seemed to work was that matter is falling towards a black hole. And as it falls in towards a black hole, it settles into a disk, and material in the disk heats up because of viscous drag. And it is the very, very hot gas over there which is emitting radiation, which we see. So that was the first evidence, 1964. And gradually people had better and better evidence in many more galaxies. And this is an image from a paper in 2004. On the x-axis is what the mass of a galaxy or a bulge is, and on the y-axis is the estimated mass of the black hole at the center. And these masses were estimated by looking at velocity dispersion in the innermost region, very, very close to the black hole. Sometimes it was the rotational velocity of gas, hot gas, and sometimes the velocity dispersion of stars in that region. And you can see that for galaxies which are as big as about 10 to the 12, a few times 10 to the 11 solar masses, the black hole mass could be 1 billion times the mass of the sun. The bulge in our own galaxy is somewhat smaller, so that actually refers to the lowest point, the point which is at 10 to the 9 solar masses for the bulge, and a few million times the mass of the sun for the black hole. So therefore, it was expected for quite some time that there must be a black hole at the center of our own galaxy. The main difficulty was how do we look and how do we prove that there is one? So what is the difficulty? So over here, you can see the sky map in different wavebands. It's an all sky map in a band around the band of the Milky Way. All of us are, of course, familiar with the optical image, which is third from the bottom. We see that on a very, very clear night, not from cities, but if we go out of cities, we can see this. And we can see that in the optical, there are these dark bands which appear, and this is essentially because of absorption from light coming in from the central part of the galaxy by intervening gas and dust. So in all of these, which are going from 408 megahertz in radio at the top to gamma rays at the bottom, you can see that the radiation from the central part is visible in some wavebands. Stars are also visible in some wavebands. But if I want to look at both, then near infrared, which is actually the K band, wavelength of around 2 microns, that is the best choice that we have. So people wanted to take a look at the central part of galaxies in the K band. But even here, the absorption because of intervening material is huge. It's so the flux drops by a factor of about 1,000 because of intervening absorption. And so people did not try it for a long time. And Reinhard Genzel was the first person to think of it, think of trying it out. And he started his project in early 1990s. The major difficulty is, of course, this extinction or reduction of flux. The other difficulty is that the atmosphere is very turbulent, and because of that, the images keep on shifting. So initially, what they did was to use what is called speckle imaging. You take an image for a very, very short amount of time. And you keep on repeating that, and then you add the images by shifting appropriately. If you don't do that, what the turbulent atmosphere does is that the images keep on shifting around by a small amount, and the image of each star, instead of being a point, becomes a smudge. And as the central part of the galaxy has a large number of stars, the images begin to merge with each other, and it is very hard to figure out which star is where. So that is what they did in the beginning, but eventually they turned to something called adaptive optics. So before adaptive optics, I'll talk about active optics. Most of the large observatories in the world are use reflecting telescopes, because in a reflecting telescope, you can support the mirror from behind, and you don't need to just worry about, in case of a refracting telescope, you will support a lens from the sides. And for a very large lens, the weight itself would begin to deform things. For reflecting telescopes also, as the telescope is tilted to look at different parts of the sky, the shape of the mirror can change a little bit, and that changes the quality of image. In order to avoid that, what people used to do earlier was to use a very, very thick mirror. So the mirror could be as thick as 1/5 of the diameter. Now that works fine up to some stage, but beyond a certain stage, what happens is that the mirror is so thick that as the temperature changes during the night, the surface of the mirror and the interior of the mirror are at very different temperatures, and that also begins to deform the mirror. So which is why after the Palomar telescope came up in around 1920, so that had a diameter of 5 meters, nothing much bigger was built for about 7 or 8 decades. So the next bigger telescope was Keck telescope with a diameter of 10 meters, which came up in 1990s. And the reason was essentially this, that I need to have a mirror which will not deform, and either because of load or because of temperature. So in active optics, which became available in late 1980s, what was done was to use a thin mirror, but to use a computerized model which will shape the mirror to compensate for both temperature variations and the mechanical load. So as that technology was being developed, people started looking at further modifications, and that is where adaptive optics comes in. So we know that the atmospheric turbulence perturbs the wavefront. So instead of a plain wavefront from a distant point source, we get a perturbed wavefront which looks like this green thing on top. So the source here is shown to be Saturn. So what has to be done is to figure out what is the deformity in the wavefront and use a deformable mirror to straighten the wavefront and make it into a plane wave. And then you will get a corrected high resolution image. So it sounds all right in theory, but how does one do it in practice? So what one can do is to have a large number of small telescopes or small mirrors or lenses, which will each try to focus the image of a point source. If we had a flat wavefront or a plane wavefront, then all the foci will be at the same point. But because the wavefront gets perturbed by the turbulent atmosphere, the image will shift around depending on which lens in this array that we are looking at. So the detector has to sense that shift and do a correction. And since bright point sources are not available in every part of the sky, astronomers use laser guide stars to achieve this. So this is the first adaptive optics image from 1989. And this was done by the Meudon Observatory in France. On the left, you can see the image without adaptive optics. And on the right, you can see that you resolve this smudge into 2 point sources, which are very close to each other. The scale of 1 arc second angle is shown over here on top. And that is typically the scale over which the atmospheric turbulence smudges images. So you can see that the one on the left is smudged at that level. But because of adaptive optics on the right, we have a much better resolution. If you do a quick calculation for optical telescopes, you will find that anything which has a diameter of more than 5-6 inches will have a resolving power much better than 1 arcsecond. But because of atmospheric turbulence, we actually cannot see anything much better than 1 arcsecond unless one has adaptive optics. So this is an image of the central part of the galaxy put together using adaptive optics. And you can see a large number of stars. You can see the scale of 10 arcseconds marked over here. And that you should use that to appreciate how good this thing is, because if we had not used adaptive optics, each star will have a diameter which will be of the order of 1/10 of this scale, which is 1 arcsecond. So we are able to see stars individually in this region primarily because of adaptive optics. And on the right, you see the reconstructed image of one particular star. We'll come back to it. So this is a small animation of adaptive optics. So we have a bright source which the telescope is looking at, and the image looks like this. It is kind of shaking around because of the perturbed wavefront. And then we add adaptive optics to the system, and that creates the appropriate image, diffraction limited image of a point source. Now what I can do is that if I have a bright point source, I can block that particular part out, and I can look at the neighborhood of that particular point to see if there are fainter stars around or even planets around that star. So that kind of a game can be played if we have adaptive optics. So this is an animation of images of the galactic center before adaptive optics came into play. And you can see that each of these stars looks rather fat. And you notice that this animation kind of ends somewhere around 2006. So later part has been done with adaptive optics. This is not an image, but a set of images combined with some graphics to show how the orbits are evolving. The earlier animation was from the ESO group, which operates from the Very Large Telescope in Chile. This is from the Keck UCLA group. So the ESO group is Reinhard Genzel, and the UCLA group is Andreas Ghez. So you can see that over time, a complete orbit of one of the stars has been reconstructed. In fact, orbits of many stars have been reconstructed over about 25 years that they have been looking at these things. And using all of that data, combining with other data, these are the estimates of mass contained within a certain radius r. You can see that as we get towards the center, the mass contained within keeps on dropping down, except that the two smallest r points are almost at the same level, meaning that one massive object dominates over there. This is the reconstructed orbit of the star S2. So you can see observations starting in 1992, going all the way to 2002 in this image. But now, of course, we have data for much later period as well. So this is for a number of stars near the center. S2 is what I showed you earlier. The shortest period star that is known so far is S62, which is shown in red over here. And that has a time period of just over 6 years. So now whatever is the central object has to lie in the region, overlap region of all of these orbits. So it has to be in this tiny region over here. And we have an estimate of mass from the time periods and same major axis of each of the orbits of each of these stars. So when that is put together, we get this kind of a curve for enclosed mass. So this is in the innermost region. The x-axis at the bottom is labeled in parsecs, which is a unit favored by astronomers. And 1 parsec is roughly 3 into 10 to the 16 meters, or 3.26 light years. On the top, it is labeled in the units of the black hole or the Schwarzschild radius, which Harbinder had introduced, 2 gm by c square. So the Schwarzschild radius is at 10 to the 0. The various stars for which orbits have been reconstructed, S2 and S62, they give us a constraint on the enclosed mass all the way up to about 10 to the minus 4 parsecs, or about 200 times the Schwarzschild radius. So within a radius of about 200 times the Schwarzschild radius, the enclosed mass is a little bit more than 4 million times the mass of the sun. At other wavelengths, one can see an X-ray hotspot, infrared flares, radio sources, and so on. But one does not have reliable orbit information from these sources, and therefore one cannot constrain mass so well. That is why the X-ray hotspot and the IR flare actually have a very large error bar over here. So this is from the ESO survey, zooming in towards the central part of the galaxy. So the last part here, of course, is imagined imaging by the Event Horizon Telescope. They haven't yet published their images of the central part of the galaxy. But I think it is absolutely remarkable that we have been observing stars in the central part of our galaxy for nearly 30 years. We can see them moving, we can reconstruct their orbits and figure out how much mass is there. So the current status is that people have moved beyond adaptive optics, and they are now using interferometry in the K-band, both at VLT and at Keck. And with the interferometry, their resolution has increased by a factor of almost 10. The gravitational redshift has been measured for stars in the vicinity of the central object, and precession of orbit due to relativistic corrections have also been observed. And these verify the space-time geometry in the weak field limit. The summary is that the Nobel Prize 2020 recognizes theoretical advancements and observational work that establish black holes as astrophysical objects. The citation shies away from stating that Genzel and Ghez have established the presence of a black hole, which is technically absolutely correct. Roy Kerr, who gave the relativistic solution for a rotating for a black hole with angular momentum, and the Event Horizon team perhaps have a stronger claim on that count, and maybe in coming years they will be awarded. I hope that is soon, because Roy Kerr is already in his 90s, and recognition for his work should be given to him before he passes on. That's where I will stop. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Bagla, for that very beautiful talk. Shall we now go on to the questions? Anuj? Anuj ji?
Yes, ma'am.
Zoom पे लिखित में, my God, लिखित में कोई क्वेश्चन आए हैं क्या?
We'll have to request the audience to ask the questions, please.
So anybody who has a question, please raise your hand.
Pankaj has some questions or not?
पंकज ने हैंड नहीं रेस किया है.
नहीं, अगर और कोई क्वेश्चन नहीं पूछ रहा,
Welcome, Professor Khanna. Would you like to say something?
No, sorry, I don't have any question.
or
Okay.
any comment?
Comment.
Professor Pankaj Saran, you are muted. I think you were asking something.
It's okay. Jagit, what was the color scheme when you showed in the last movie,
Right.
that video? When you go towards the center, the different stars are colored differently. Is that just for specifying, or just for clarity, or does it have any?
The movie is actually based on actual images. So
I
these
see.
may be the true colors of these stars, except for the very last part where they have given the Event Horizon Telescope type.
Yeah, you told us that. Yeah,
That I don't know whether EHT people have given them the data.
that is just a simulation to.
Yeah, or it could just be simulation. But before that, all the images of stars are actual data.
Actual images. Good.
और कोई क्वेश्चन है? ये
Professor Dua. Professor Dua, you'll have to unmute yourself.
But it's not, yeah.
Yeah.
Professor Jasjeet, it was a wonderful presentation. Maybe that I'm very shallow in physics, but when I look at all the Nobel Prizes in all the fields for the last 20 years or so, I connected it for the welfare of the human being. What do you think about the last description which you are given?
Right.
Besides being theoretical important, can it be used in any way for human welfare? This whole investigation and the whole theories part?
No, there is no immediate thing which you can do with general relativity for human well-being or improvement of human lives. I think it is more of a blue skies research and learning about things and learning about our universe, solving that puzzle. I don't think even the people who have got the medal will claim that it is for betterment of human lives. No.
That means those who are screening the prizes or something like that, those who are at the HUD level, they have started drifting from the basic will of Alfred Nobel, who said that for the wellness, for the welfare of the human beings. Is it so?
Yeah, you can say that, but I think that is, I have not been following Nobel Prizes very, very closely for a very long time. So yeah, it could be. I don't know if it is a short-term trend or a long-term trend, but it could be. Yeah. See, for example, the awards given for particle physics or field theory would also pretty much fall into the same category. Right. So,
And
yeah.
does this central black hole affects the environmental factors in our own solar system?
No, it
No.
doesn't. It is too far for that.
It's too far.
The light from there takes about 24,000 years to come to us. And the distance is very large. There is a lot of intervening material. So I don't see any obvious way in which it can affect the solar system. Of course, it is one of the lower mass supermassive black holes. Other galaxies have much bigger black holes. If you recall in the plot which I showed you,
Yeah.
it was the lightest one that we know of. So yeah, no, I don't think it can affect us. Yeah.
I think I can say here that it holds the galaxy together because it's a very massive, very compact object. So it's essentially the main gravitational force which is holding the galaxy together. Right?
I see.
And also the fact that even the stars which are close to it, they are outside the 3 times Schwarzschild radius of this particular black hole, and they're orbiting it. And I think even that knowledge of, and see these observations were very meticulously planned, and adaptive optics, the technology that came in and helped these observations. So I think they would indirectly definitely help in various other manners.
You mean
And
a ripple effect will start?
See, for example, astronomers were the ones who started using CCD cameras very seriously in 1970s and 80s. And now they are there in all the devices that you have on your mobile phone.
Yeah.
I mean, all of this meeting is possible only because of further development of such devices, which made them so easy to kind of put together and implement, so that we can sit and have a meeting like this where we can see each other. You can listen to my talk. So none of those things would have been possible without development of such technology. In that sense, one should not take a short-term view, but of course you are correct that Nobel has written in his will that it should be for betterment of human life. So it is up to the committee to take a call on that.
Yes, thank you very much.
Sir, Mr. is asking.
I'd just like to add that adaptive optics may soon help, detect and correct for retinopathy. So there are already people working on various surgical instruments for where the adaptive optics will be used.
Thank you, Professor KP Singh, for your comment. I'm sure there are more questions. Has Professor Rajesh Kochar joined?
No,
Anurji?
he is not able to join now. He's out of his home now, so he could not join.
अच्छा, ठीक है. तो बाद में आएंगे क्या?
No, ma'am. He is not joining actually.
He will not join. Okay. So shall we go on to Facebook now? Are there any questions?
Some questions in the chat on Zoom.
Zoom के chat में, is time reversal possible, which is given by Stephen Hawking, who is best researcher for black hole also.
Okay, I'll start
अपना
with
नाम बताया करिए, ये किसका question है?
So there is a question from Pritam Kumar. How did we found out there is a black holes at the center of each galaxy? So what people do is they look at the central part of a galaxy and they take spectrum. If the stars or the gas is moving around, then that gives you spectral lines which have either broadening or a specific shape. And it is from there that we find out that there is a black hole. So wherever we have looked, we have found something. And that is how we found it. So then there is a question from Anita Gulia. Does every black hole contain a singularity? So Arvinder, maybe you want to take that.
I don't quite understand the question. See, if you talk about the regular Schwarzschild black holes, yes, there is a singularity. And this singularity black hole, the idea, okay, now let me put it this way. The notion of black hole is for the popular, let's go by the popular understanding of it, light doesn't come out of it. So things go in. And that Schwarzschild solution definitely has singularity and an event horizon. And we know that singularities do not exist without an event horizon. So this combination of singularity being covered with an event horizon is the concept of black hole. And yes, there is a singularity.
So then there is another one which says, what about GPS? It uses GTR for some correction purpose. So that is correct. The GPS positioning system uses relativistic corrections. The one which we use it does not have any relativistic corrections, but the version which they use for guiding missiles, that one does, because over there they want better than 1 meter accuracy. But the one which we have in our phones does not use the relativistic corrections.
There is one from BHU. Ashutosh Yadav asks, hello sir, is time reversal possible, which is given by Stephen Hawking?
Not that we know of. Yeah, so no, we don't know of any situation in which time reversal is possible. I don't know when or where Stephen Hawking has said such a thing.
I think, can I come in here? I
Yeah,
think the student means the singularity theorem, Roger Penrose Hawking singularity, which is essentially going back in time.
Okay.
So I think that's the thing. So,
So they basically, within relativity, there is a time reversibility. And that is what was used by Hawking to demonstrate that the universe must have had a singularity in the past.
The universe begins with a singularity.
Yeah.
So I hope that answers your question. The next one is Anhat Singh. How two massive black holes form binary star system? LIGO detected gravitational waves from a binary black hole system, right?
Right. Yeah. So the question is how the two massive black holes form binary star system, and when they require such extreme conditions to form in the first place, and have we described the correct model of merging binary or trinary black hole systems? If yes, can you point me to the direction where to find anything about this? Okay, for the first part, although the answer is not known completely, it is believed that if you have a binary star, then that binary star can, in principle, evolve into a binary black hole, which then merges. Many people believe that this will happen
if sun is
more easily in clusters of stars, where there are many stars hovering around, and a third star can come and make the binary a little bit tighter, so that these things can go on to merge at some time. Where to point you? There is a lot of work on this, but unless you are kind of an expert in perturbative calculations in relativity, I would advise you not to kind of jump into it so easily. So much of the work on how the merger happens has been done by teams led by two people, Luc Blanchet from France and Bala Iyer from Raman Research Institute, Bangalore. So both of them devoted pretty much their entire research careers to improving these calculations. And that was done over a period from 1980s to around 2010. And very painstakingly, they have kind of improved the models. There are people who also do simulation studies, but even that is fairly hard.
All questions.
Deepak says, how much time required for formation of black hole, and discuss some harsh property of black holes. So time required, if it forms by through stellar evolution, then it could be anywhere between a few million years to a few tens of million years. There are other processes which take much longer. I don't know what exactly you mean by harsh property of black holes. Their gravitational field is strong, but it is still a gravitational field. It is not that they can reach out to infinite distance and pick up things and gobble them. So a black hole is not something which sucks things up with a straw. You can be in an orbit around a black hole and live happily without worrying about things.
In fact, there is a question about what sun moves. Sun is actually, I mean, the solar system is going around the center of the galaxy. So we are orbiting it in some sense.
Yeah.
So another thing is, as Shomak Roy Chaudhary will put it, black holes are not cosmic
vacuum cleaners.
Vacuum cleaners, yeah.
Good words.
Anuj
One
ji,
new message.
Facebook से ले लीजिए.
No, ma'am, we have not got any questions from Facebook.
एक और क्वेश्चन है
No, this is
KPC.
KP's comment.
Brain imaging at synaptic resolution and retinopathy. ये KP सिंह जी आपका ही है?
No, he has added that. Yeah, he has.
Yeah, he has added that. Okay. I have a question.
Hanji.
is the number of black holes in the universe increasing? And if so, will there be a time when these black holes will actually act as vacuum cleaners and snap up everything?
Well, the number of black holes increases when very massive stars dies and forms a new black hole. But black holes also merge to form, two black holes can merge to form one black hole, and that decreases the number of black holes. So both the processes are going on. And no, I don't think there will be a stage where black holes can clean up anything that they wish.
But how much can you, what is the estimate of black holes in the universe? So they keep.
See, some very deep studies have been done using X-ray telescopes, looking at nearby galaxies, because a black hole which is sitting quietly will not show up anywhere. But if there is some gas falling into it, then it will show up in X-rays or some other waveband. And studies of some nearby galaxies showed that there are of the order of 1,000 black holes which can be seen through hot gas around them. So that is for a single galaxy. And but that also means that roughly for every 100 million stars, we have one black hole. So the stars outnumber black holes by a very, 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 very wide margin.
So in what way the work has enhanced our understanding of universe?
So one is, see, Roger Penrose's work demonstrated theoretically that within Einstein's theory of relativity, it is possible for a normal star to collapse and form a black hole at some stage when it runs out of fuel and so on. So in that situation, it can collapse and it can form a black hole. That is the major advancement. For a long time, it was not clear whether you can form a black hole, or does a black hole has to kind of live from eternity to eternity, because if you look at the relativistic solution of Schwarzschild and Roy-Kerr, both of them give you a solution which is stationary, unchanging. Whereas what Penrose was able to demonstrate was that it is possible to start with a situation where there is no black hole and material undergoes a collapse and you form a black hole. So that was a major advance. And for the second part, they have demonstrated that just like other galaxies, our own galaxy also does have something which seems to be a very, very massive black hole at the center. So it would have been very strange that we had data about thousands of galaxies, other galaxies, and black holes at their centers, but not about our own galaxy.
Is there any scientific or technical name of this black hole in the center of our galaxy?
Well, the central part is often referred to as Sagittarius A star.
Sagittarius A star.
Because it is in the constellation of Sagittarius.
Okay.
And Sagittarius A was the earlier determination of the galactic center. And then they discovered a very bright radio source near the center, and that is Sagittarius A star. So that is almost coincident with the direction of the black hole.
Sagittarius A black hole or Sagittarius A star?
Sagittarius A star. That is the name used for the radio source at the center, but the radio source is so close to the black hole that you cannot actually differentiate between them.
Thank you. Thank you.
There are a couple of new questions. I wonder if you would like to take that.
I think
Sir, beyond the black hole, there is parallel universe or not?
अच्छा क्वेश्चन है
And
Is there any relation
I
between?
think the last question which has come is more interesting from Harshita. If an object were to enter a black hole, will it be crushed or pulled apart? So that actually depends on how big the black hole is. Because if you recall the relationship between the radius and the mass of the black hole, the radius is given by 2gm by c square. So if the mass becomes 10 times larger, the radius becomes 10 times larger, which means that effectively, if I were to calculate a notional density for a black hole, that density keeps coming down when the mass keeps going up. So if it is a low mass black hole, then you will be torn apart. And if it is a very, very high mass black hole, as you fall in, you wouldn't even notice.
Sure.
okay,
In
so
fact, for intermediate mass black holes, the only way to discover them is when a star comes very close and is torn apart by tidal forces. And we see that star being torn apart. We don't see the black hole. Yeah, that's it.
In fact, in the Einstein First project, the video where from the site, they actually in one of the demonstrations show spaghettization, in which basically spaghettization is this long, stretched out. How does it happen if you go very near a massive body? So they have a demo which they do with balls, of course. And if the student is interested, he or she can go and see it.
Professor Vipin Srivastava want to comment?
Yeah, just one quick question. Does a black hole have a lifetime?
It does, if you believe Stephen Hawking's calculation.
Yeah.
He has given an expression for how long a black hole can live before it evaporates. But the lifetime is very long for very massive black holes and short for very low mass black holes. As far as we are concerned, the kind of black holes which they have discovered at the center of the galaxy, that will live for trillions of years. So we don't really have to worry about it going away anywhere.
All right. Yeah.
No, but worry is something which astronomers are supposed to do because they are talking about astronomical timescales.
But
so
it evaporates, you say, right?
Yeah.
हाँ, which is very surprising.
Very surprising.
क्योंकि हमें तो यही पता है कि वो compress होता जाएगा.
Yeah.
That was the seminal work of Stephen Hawking in 1970s, which followed on some work done by others, namely Jacob Bekenstein and others, who showed that you can think of black hole as a thermodynamic object, and the area and the mass are related in ways which are similar to entropy and temperature. And from there, he kind of went into the regime where he considered a field of particles and antiparticles in the vicinity of a black hole, and showed that there are processes which cause leakage of mass from the black hole as far as a distant observer is concerned. So that was his interpretation.
So if there are no new questions, I would request Professor K.P. Singh. Professor K.P. Singh has been in TIFR and now associated with IISER Mohali. Professor K.P. Singh, would you like to give your concluding remarks?
Well, I think Harvinder and Jasjeet have covered this beautifully, and almost all the aspects of the Nobel Prize winning work, and also answered these questions very well. So, in response to Professor Dua's remark, I would rather say that it is heartening to note that the Nobel Committee is not restricted anymore to the narrow definition that was given by Nobel, but actually looking beyond to the blue skies research, whether it was a LIGO Nobel Prize or
this one and many before that, Jasjit also mentioned in other fields. So, and some of these are unanticipated benefits to mankind, which you cannot predict today, but you never know eventually how they, transform the human life going along. But it is very important that the use of especially new technology is accorded, its place in the blue skies of here, and and we actually broaden these definitions, and that's a good job. And although there are various things people have raised, red herrings about especially Rai Chaudhry's work not being accorded. Kerr actually, who gave 63, his solution is not accorded, even though the Penrose 65 work has been accorded. And Kerr, an New Zealand scientist, he's also he's in 90s, older than I think Penrose. So, well, let's see. There are many interesting things and so on. And especially the Mitchell's presentation was actually on 27th November 1783 to the philosophical transactions, in the philosophical transactions when he was a member of the Royal Society. He was an FRS too. So he was in the Royal Society and making his presentation, which was yesterday, right? The 27th November. So pretty timely in some sense. And that is, I got that from the actual site of the Nobel Prize, the Swedish site. They listed his work, and Harvinder showed also the actual manuscript and so on. So I think this is a great thing that astrophysics has attracted, almost a large number of prizes in the last 4 years. And so it's 5 years. So we look forward to more such things, especially the EHT contribution is also path-breaking. The Event Horizon Telescope, which they mapped about 2 years ago, and which was announced last year on the mapping with radio telescope. And so everything on radio resolution, the technological advances on resolution. And now Jasjit also mentioned the coming of age of interferometry will take us further, a factor of 10. And I'd like to say that even the people are working even on X-ray interferometry for the last 10, 15 years. So there are the CCDs and so on, and a lot of things come out because the quest for blue sky knowledge drives people to find new techniques and develop new technologies, and that's very important. And that's what I think the next generation and the people, young people in the audience should carry home, that it's also not only just the theoretical work, but also the advancement of technology is very, very important, and many uses later on you'll never find, like I mentioned in the medical use, the adaptive optic. That's all I like to close my remarks with. And thanks again to the wonderful 2 talks we had today.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor KP Singh. And now I request Shri Dharamveer, President SPSTI, to present a vote of thanks.
Thank you very much, Harvinder ji and Jasjit ji, for such an enlightening and knowledgeable talk on the universe. And we all feel very concerned. Everybody is anxious to understand the universe, where it is going, how it is working. And black hole is certainly one of the most one of the most ingredient in understanding the universe. So thank you very much, and we always enjoyed listening to your lectures. And I would also request you, if you could give any other lecture concerning the future of universe based on the black holes for children. How we can carry it to the school children, let us say class 11 and 12, they can understand. And everybody is generally concerned about future of universe. How long? Where are we heading for? and how our planetary system heading for, where is it heading for. So I think there is general anxiety in amongst the people, common man, and everyone knows that our solar system has a finite life. It cannot stay forever. So therefore, we would request both of you if you could plan some lectures for school children as well, or UG or PG students of the schools and colleges. Thank you very much from the SPSTI, and I also thank all the participants uh, for their enthusiastic uh, response, as well as a very vibrant question and answer session.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Yeah, Anuj will now flash the upcoming lectures. Please stay for a few minutes to have a look at them, and please join us. The Nobel Prize series has the same login. So please note, of course, we will be sending you the notice, but please also note the days and times, mark them, and we look forward to meeting you again during these lectures. The Science Playground is a new series that we have started where scientists speak from their own laboratories and make their work understandable to the general public and to college students and senior school students in particular.
So before we close, any other remark by anyone? Anyone would like to make any comment?
No, big thanks. That's
अनुज सबको अनम्यूट कर दीजिए एक बार, वैसे भी बहुत कम लोग रह गए.
हाँ.
मैं भी कर सकती हूँ शायद.
बागला साहब, आपका लेक्चर हमेशा अच्छा रहता है, और हम चाहेंगे कि किसी स्टेज पर जैसे ही थोड़ा रिलैक्सेशन होता है लॉकडाउन का,
हाँ जी,
तो हम बच्चों के लिए कुछ कराना चाहेंगे स्कूल लेवल पे, सीनियर स्कूल चिल्ड्रन लाइक क्लास 11-12 के ये यूनिवर्स का जो आपने इतना अच्छा तरह से बताया, क्या सिंप्लीफिकेशन करके बच्चों तक हम पहुंचा सकें.
जरूर करेंगे.
तो क्योंकि ये एक ऐसा टॉपिक है जिसमें हमेशा हर व्यक्ति को इंटरेस्ट रहता है, एंड एवरीबॉडी इज एंशियस टू नो अबाउट द how the universe functions and what is the future of our solar system. And after listening to you and other talks in the past, we seem to be like one part of the atom, in the entire universe. हम तो एटॉमिक स्ट्रक्चर में भी इससे भी छोटे हैं पूरे यूनिवर्स में. तो ये सोच के थोड़ा सा बुरा भी लगता है कि हम सोचते हैं लाइफ इतनी प्रेशियस है, और पूरे यूनिवर्स के संदर्भ में तो लाइफ कुछ चीज ही नहीं है. By the time one galaxy, one star eats up another one, it may be taking some thousands of years, and the Earth may wither away by that time.
And we still know very less.
And still we know very little. Very little.
Less than 5% of the universe.
May not be 5%, maybe 1% or 0.1%.
नहीं
4.6% of the universe.
दिखता उतना. ये बताइए बागला साहब, लास्ट क्वेश्चन है, हालांकि ये वोट ऑफ थैंक्स का समय था. क्या do we will ever evolve beyond the relativistic quantum mechanics or relativistic mechanics?
We don't
Will
know.
there be another mechanics?
See, we don't know for the simple reason that we don't know define relativity with other forces, gravity with other forces. But at a practical scale, it will not make any difference, because at a practical scale, we still live with Newtonian mechanics. So the fact that there is relativity doesn't matter so much in day-to-day life. And in fact, it is interesting. Science is the only thing in which you can change the fundamental theory, the foundation completely, but the building still stays.
Well said.
डॉक्टर बागला एक 10th क्लास के स्टूडेंट ने क्वेश्चन पूछा था.
I must thank both the speakers for a very illuminated lectures. अभी बात कर रहे थे कि अभी तो हमने कुछ भी नहीं, बहुत कम जानते हैं. कहा जाता है जानते जानते ये जाना कि अभी तो कुछ भी नहीं जाना.
ये आपने जो है ना कि करोड़पति की बात की है आपने.
ये मैं अपने हरविंदर जस्सल जी का सुन रहा था, वुमन इक्वलिटी. In fact, I have been in a seminar from 11 to 2 p.m. institution of a near seminar today, webinar today. That was again on women equality.
Yes.
And the development in the country depends upon women empowerment. Thank you. This is Harvinder Jassal ji. It has been a great pleasure to know our women achievers. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
प्रोफेसर बेरी आप कुछ कह रहे थे.
हाँ जी, बागला साहब, एक 10th क्लास का क्वेश्चन स्टूडेंट ने क्वेश्चन पूछा था, ब्लैक होल ब्लैक है तो इसकी फोटो कैसे खींची गई?
वेरी गुड क्वेश्चन.
भाई साहब ये सवाल बड़ा इम्पोर्टेंट है.
आप मुझे बताइए. आई डोंट नो व्हाट आई टोल्ड हिम, बट आई वुड लाइक टू नो फ्रॉम यू आल्सो.
The light does not travel in a straight line around black hole. It gets bent and bent very sharply. तो जो लाइट रेज हैं, फोटॉन्स हैं, they can only come within 1.5 times the black hole radius. जो हमारे तरफ तक आ रहे हैं तो उसी रेडियस में से आ सकते हैं. तो हम अगर किसी ब्लैक होल की तरफ देखें तो हमें उतनी रेडियस का एक काला छेद दिखेगा और उसके आसपास लाइट दिखेगी. तो इवेंट होराइजन टेलीस्कोप ने वही इमेज किया था.
भाई ब्लैक की फोटो कौन खींचना चाहता है भाई? सुंदर की फोटो खींचना चाहेगा.
ब्लैक होल के आसपास बहुत कुछ होता है जी.
My first book, as I told you earlier, I read was Birth and Death of a Star. It's a book I still didn't get. I requested you if you can find it. It was very interesting book. PhD शुरू की थी तो वो पहली बुक वही पढ़ी थी, क्योंकि my PhD is in cosmic rays.
ये किसकी लिखी हुई है?
मुझे याद ही नहीं, मुझे भाटिया साहब ने दी थी. It was very interesting, क्योंकि हमें पता नहीं था कि स्टार्स का बर्थ और डेथ भी होती है. As a young student, we don't know. हम जब से पैदा हुए स्टार्स देख रहे हैं, we don't know कि इनका भी बर्थ और डेथ है. So it was very, very interesting, and all the stages of the star were shown. I still remember the pictures I had seen, but
चेक करूंगा मैं, पता लगा.
अच्छा, दो
अगर ये ब्लैक होल है तो मालूम नहीं कितने स्टार्स को खा गया है ये जी. ये तो आपको जसजीत जी बताएंगे.
उसके लिए बहुत कुछ पता करना पड़ेगा. ब्लैक होल से तो पूछ नहीं सकते.
जसजीत सिंह से तो पूछ सकते हैं जी.
मैं सर्न के एक्सपेरिमेंट में तो पॉपुलराइज करके हुए थे कि पृथ्वी ब्लैक होल बन जाएगा LHC एक्सपेरिमेंट से, और पृथ्वी
I still remember.
It made us a little more famous.
Worried क्या हमें ना खा जाए.
To know कि whether पृथ्वी जाएगी कि नहीं. हमारे लेक्चर के बाद ऊपर हेडिंग पेपर वाले ने दिया, सुमन बेरी सेज पृथ्वी नहीं जाएगी.
अच्छा, एक सवाल है कि if something can be planned for school children, school students.
कहाँ पे है?
Thanks a lot for this insightful session. Very nice suggestion. If something can be planned for school students.
जी करेंगे, हाँ वो भी करेंगे.
Specifically for school students, हाँ वो करना है school. ठीक. Okay then.
अच्छा,
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
मैं एक सवाल पूछा करता हूँ.
हाँ जरूर पूछे.
कि जहाँ कहा जाता है कि ये स्टार मिलियन ऑफ लाइट ईयर्स अवे है हमसे.
हाँ जी.
इसका मतलब तो ये हुआ यहाँ हम उसे अब देख रहे हैं, वो शायद मिलियन ऑफ ईयर्स पहले वहाँ था.
जी
हाँ वो तो ठीक.
अब कहाँ पर है ये तो हम जानते ही नहीं.
अब का मतलब भी फर्क है.
वो तो टाइम, फेस टाइम.
अब के क्या मतलब?
आज पता नहीं कहाँ होगा. आज पता नहीं कहाँ होगा.
हाँ जी.
वो जो हो चुका है
तो हवा में ही बात कर रहे हैं, इसका मतलब तो है.
हाँ मतलब कॉज एंड इफेक्ट जो है बहुत टाइम गैप है इसमें. यह बहुत फिलोसफिकल बात हो गई अब।
Okay, so next weekend we meet again with Mehak Sharma's lecture on chemistry. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks a lot.
So we close.
Thank you, Kayasan.